tell me your story, for you're gone.
Welcome to the Fresh Toones Show. My name is Dave Paltz, and the focus of today's show is telling our stories. And on the first Friday of every month, I do a show that tries to encourage folks to share their stories, tell a little about their life experience. And usually I encourage folks to start out with a small audience, friends, family, to keep down all the criticisms and the picking at the stories that we want to share with people. Today I'm going to share a story of when I just came out into the real world as a young adult and got a job at the Rochester Psychiatric Center. If you've ever seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I had one of those jobs as an attendant on one of those back wards, and things were pretty scary, I'll have to tell you. They didn't have the medications to help people back then, so sometimes people flipped out pretty bad. But most of the folks, patients, I could relate to and tried to help as best I could. I didn't really have a lot of training at that time. I think I was, 20, had a minor in psychology, but what's that about anyways? I was a mental hygiene therapist aide, a fancy name for basically a bouncer, trying to control this psychotic world that we found ourselves in. I'm not going to say too much more. I want to get into the story, but I wanted to set up how the story came about. Actually, what inspired this story 30 years later, I never told this story, never shared this story hardly with anybody until I was in my 50s and I saw what was going on at Abu Ghraib. It really sparked some flashbacks in my life. So here we go. The story is called Parallel Worlds. It won quite a few awards in film festivals back in the 2000s. I had a chance to play it at the Rochester Film Festival, so people in Rochester could see a little bit of this history. Invited a lot of fellow employees to come and see it, and a lot of the folks did come out and were surprised that they had never heard these experiences from the early 70s. Parallel Worlds. My name is Dave Paltz, and in 1973, at the age of 21, I went to work at the Rochester State Hospital. After 3 weeks of training, I was placed on one of the back wards as a mental hygiene therapist aide. For a few months, I worked on the semi-civilized day shift with nurses, a part-time social worker, and on one morning a week, a recreational therapist. We would also see a doctor briefly each week to prescribe medications for the patients. Because there were limited drugs available at the time, the state of New York provided its severely mentally ill patients with all the loose tobacco they could roll and smoke. We regularly handed out bags of red cheap tobacco, the worst smelling tobacco ever. In the winter months, the ward would become one thick cloud of smoke. Loose tobacco and cigarette butts were everywhere on the floor, in the chairs and covering the ping pong table, a favorite rolling spot. In those days, the patients had to clean their own wards. A lot of the therapy for patients revolved around sweeping and mopping the long hallways, expansive dorms, and worst of all, cleaning the bathrooms. On the day shift, some of us therapists would actually do some of the work with the patients. After a short time, I was rotated onto the evening shift. On evenings, manual labor by staff was against the employees' unwritten rules, and I was told in no uncertain terms not to do any of the work with the patients. Somehow, it was thought of as being beneath them, and that it weakened the staff control and the hierarchy of the patient-staff relations. I actually enjoyed being active and continued to sweep and mop with the patients. This did not go over well. I didn't like working on the evening shift. The atmosphere seemed even further back in the dark ages than the day shift. One evening, an employee who I knew vaguely from high school was arguing with a patient over the TV channel that was going to be on. There were a number of patients who were watching the channel that the other patient wanted, but they knew their place and said nothing. The problematic patient was ordered to go to bed, but refused. As I walked into the day room, the employee had the patient pinned to the floor with his fist raised back to strike. I called out the employee's first name and grabbed his arm as it was coming down. His fist didn't make contact, but the impact of one employee holding back another staff member reverberated through that whole hospital that night. The supervising aide, with 40 years of experience, told me, quote, "Don't ever interfere like that again. Someday you may need our help," and walked away. The next evening, I was told that I was being put back on days where the hospital could supervise me more closely. It appears that the evening supervisor, who had offered his harsh advice, refused to work with me and said that all I did all evening was play my guitar. He was correct, I played my guitar, but it was always with the patients, and it was always after we had swept and mopped the whole ward. He gave a scathing report about me, and he recommended that my probation period be extended. Needless to say, I was glad to be back on days. I spoke to the very caring head nurse of our ward about what had happened. She then reported this to the supervisor of the whole unit. She came back to me and said I was welcome to make a report about the incident, but she also wanted to let me know that this same employee had been reported for 5 other incidents, some of them much worse than what I had seen. In each instance, the reporting employee had left and the problem employee remained. It appears that the hospital actually saw the reporting employee as the one creating the dilemma. Besides, they were usually the newer employee and they wouldn't be able to hack it in such a high-stress job anyway. It took employees with a tougher temperament to survive. Some of my co-workers had been MPs in Vietnam and had only recently returned. They never really fired the reporting employee. It just became so uncomfortable for them to work there that they voluntarily handed in their resignations. I resigned after 2 years. It is now 30 years later, and my memories are shaken by the photographs from the Iraqi prisons. I am tearful that I was unable to affect a brutal situation as a young person, and I only hope that these photos will shake us all to find more adequate safeguards. It absolutely can change. It requires that our leaders be diligent in their supervision. Basic human decency should be one of our highest priorities, and it can no longer be the excuse of those responsible to say, "Gee, we never knew a thing about it." Well, they had better find out. It is their responsibility to have people under them that understand that they must report to their supervisors when these abuses occur. For our leaders to expect this to work, they will have to adamantly reinforce this concept down the whole chain of command, or they will be responsible for its failure. Hopefully, America and the world will use the abuses that we have witnessed in Iraq as the catalyst to hold our leaders more accountable. We've got the tougher stance to uphold, but that's exactly why it's so important not to let our fears overcome our decency. If we become like the terrorists, they've won.
I didn't go into a lot of depth of the experiences that I had there. I kind of just gave you a kind of overview of the experiences in the early 1970s of working at a psychiatric center. Actually, it was called the Rochester State Hospital. I think at one point there were over 1,500 patients at the Rochester State Hospital. By the time I went to work there in the early 70s, there were quite a few fewer patients there. It was still quite a sizable community. Many of the buildings were old and from the 1930s or earlier. Very cold, brick structures, very hard to heat. It was quite uninviting, to say the least, in a lot of these back wards. I wrote this song called I Must Be Crazy, and I kind of tried to make it feel like I was in one of these seclusion rooms, maybe where it was echoey or had a very strange sound to it, and tried to play up if my head was kind of feeling crazy, what it might sound like. So I'm going to play this fresh tune called I Must Be Crazy.
I must be crazy, 'cause it doesn't make sense. All the great lanes and all the expense.
I must be crazy.
Building these castles that will crumble in the sea. Oh, but maybe, baby, it's only me.
I must be crazy.
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 crazy. 'Cause having lots of money doesn't mean success.
I must be
Sometimes
crazy.
less is best. You look around, but you do not see.
I must be
Oh, but baby, it's only me. I must be crazy.
must be crazy.
I must be crazy.
But I must be crazy.
I must be crazy. Sometimes it feels as though I'm centering all by myself, with 10,000 screaming Romans with their thumbs stuck out, ready to point them down just to see me
Must be
bleed.
crazy.
Oh, but baby, maybe it's all.
I must be crazy.
I must be crazy. I must be crazy.
I must be crazy. I must be crazy.
I must be crazy. I must be crazy. Keep writing these songs. They keep my heart where it belongs.
Must be crazy.
Just singing them as I go. But maybe, baby, I'm just
But I
plain
must be
loco.
crazy.
I must be 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 crazy.
Must be crazy.
I must be crazy.
I must be crazy.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I've been pretty good at putting myself in the environment that I want to put my mind in when I write a song or I do a painting or animation. When you're talking about putting your mindset in the crazy space, that's pretty dangerous. Sometimes the best thing I could do with folks was try to help them to find ways to hold on, to get through this experience of being locked up in a psych center. A lot of folks did get out, and I felt pretty good about being part of their lives. It's ironic sometimes when I finally left, some of the patients would say, well, if Dave Paltz could get out of here, I can get out of here. Because in some ways, the employees were just as trapped as the patients were. This is a fresh tune called Hold On.
Just sitting alone, trying to find some place where we belong. We mustn't worry, but we mustn't worry. No, no. It's simple if fear to reach out, grab the first thing that comes about, but we mustn't hurry. No, we mustn't hurry. Got to sail along, use the sea, use the breeze, and use our heads. The rain just pounds harder, the clouds just grow darker, but it seems you have no
it right if you gotta start all over again. Say, hold on.
Just a little longer. Hold on. Just sitting alone, trying to find some place we belong, but we mustn't worry. We mustn't worry. It's for you to be back again. Gonna do it right if we gotta start all over again. Hold on. Just a little longer. Hold on. Hold on. Just a little longer. Hold on. Hold on. Just a little longer. Hold on.
This is the Fresh Tune Show, and today is one of my Telling Our Stories episode. And I started the show off telling the story of my experiences of working at the Rochester State Hospital, or now known as the Rochester Psych Center, in the early 70s. Oftentimes working there, the stress was pretty high, and certainly was high for the folks that were patients there that couldn't figure out sometimes how to get out of the place. Sometimes we'd feel like our lives were just hanging by a thread.
Hanging by a thread, swinging in the wind. Don't know where to begin. I'm just hanging by a string. And I'm holding on for dear life, holding on to life's kite, until she takes me away. I'm gonna sing this way, hanging by a thread, swinging in the wind. Only time will tell if I can keep hanging by a string. So many secrets I've heard, and they've all got the one true word. Well, they told you if they had the chance, they'd crush you like an ant. But I'm hanging by a thread, swinging hanging by a string. He's a hanging by a string. He's a hanging by a string.
Well, working at the psychiatric center had some many long, hard days, certainly for the patients and for the employees. We never knew what was going to come up. There weren't the medications that are available now, so sometimes folks really flipped out, and before we knew it, we were wrestling people, and myself would do the best to try to make sure nobody got hurt, but there were some pretty violent people there. This song is called It's Been a Long, Hard Day.
It's been a long hard day. It's been a long hard day. The light awoke me just like any other day. I had no thoughts of what might come my way. I just awakened to another day. I know the sun doesn't always shine. The sun might not always be mine, but I have a few words to say. It's been a long, hard day. Picked up the sword to defend myself, butchered my soul, now I fight to find the light in the days that fill our nights. Been walking through the burning cold with bare feet, and don't you know that ice can burn just like the sun? The warmth you want is called your love. It's been a long hard day. It's been a long hard day. It's been a long hard day.
Well, I'm going to end today's Fresh Toones show with an encouraging song called You Can Do It.
You can do it. You can make it through it, even though you might wonder why. There is something inside you, and it's walking beside you, and it is larger than yourself, and it's whispering your name, and it's wiping your eyes, and it's touching your soul, set you free. You are unique to this world. You need to let your flag be unfurled, to be who you are, and that is all. The sun has sprouted your seed. The warmth has lifted your head. Now you know what you know, and that is all. And it's whispering your name, and it's wiping your eyes, and it's touching your soul to set you free. You can do it, you can make it through it, even though you might wonder why. There is something inside you, and it's walking beside you. It is larger than yourself, and it's whispering your name, and it's wiping your eyes, and it's touching your soul to set you free.
That's it for the Fresh Toones Show. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great week. So long now.